Hey everyone, Pastor George here. If you hear the sound of rushing water, that is my heat. So your house is not being flooded, and hopefully ours isn't either here. I hope all of you are doing well on this Thursday and this beautiful Thursday morning. And today we are going to do something which I think I'm excited about anyway. We're going to be looking at a video, and I saw this video a few weeks ago, I think, and I went, oh, I only watched the first 5 minutes of it, but I should do, a reaction to this to kind of add my own takes on stuff. And because I don't think the video, at least in the beginning, was particularly good. But still, to kind of show the difference of how this can be done well and how you can even something that might have a net good be done poorly, and so we're going to talk about that and the reason why this is important. And we're going to start with the reason why what we're going to be talking about today is important. I also think I'm going to be doing a little bit of live Googling today, so you get to see that. So let me pull this up. This is our Bible passage for today. Ephesians 4:14 through 16. So in Ephesians 4, Paul is talking about Christian living and kind of what being engrafted into Christ is. And he goes on about this, but then he says this is kind of the benefits of it. He says, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is, Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So he points out to the Ephesians that this Christian living, which he goes on to describe from this point, is beneficial for the building up of the church and for understanding correct doctrine, correct teaching, because this is obviously something that churches are prone to fall into, right? If we aren't rooted in who Christ is and the Word, we can easily fall into other teachings. And I think what's going to be important for today is that verse 15, right? Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ, right? That we are able to understand and debate what the truth really is, right? To understand and investigate that. And we do that in love. And that's kind of, to me, when it comes to doing apologetics, when it comes to reaching across the aisle to other religions, when it comes to understanding in-house disputes in the church, that is pretty central, right? We don't want to be unmolded, or else we're just going to believe everything that we hear. But we also want to be, and we want to be firm, right? We want to know what's true and what's not. But we want to be, we don't want to become, excuse me, so rigid that we end up unable to actually love the people that we're debating and talking about. To that end, something that you all know that I'm very interested in is, apologetics generally, right? I like to do apologetics towards other religions and present a Christian case where they would present their own. Sorry, I'm still getting over sickness. And today we're going to be looking at Mormonism, which I've done a lot of stuff on. And we're going to be looking at a video that someone did. I'm going to put myself down here. Unfortunately, it's really tough to tell sometimes because I want to go wide, a bigger screen for you people out there, but it's kind of important on how I guess this is fine. I look okay down here. So just to firstly look at this is a video by someone named Fillion, who I'd never heard of before, came out a year ago, almost 2 million views, which is pretty good. Better than anything I've got on this channel, right? And the first thing you want to do is you want to look at the person who is making the video, right? Like, what's their channel all about? So let's go to Fillion's channel. By the way, I don't remember everything he says. in his video. I watched the first 5 minutes. There might be cursing. I don't know. If it's appropriate for kids, I'll mark it. If not, whatever. So it seems like, well, for me, they have all of his religion videos. So they have the Scientology cult. They have the cult of Mormonism, the cult of Osho, all these cults, I guess. And then you have astrology for men, which I guess is alpha male stuff. Steroids. Seems like there are lots of like kind of human interest stories, right?
Alan Richson, Hollywood's
stuff, like,
new
all about,
favorite
like, whether or not
fake
people are
natty.
natural
I gotta
rather
ask.
than using steroids, right?
What's
so
a
this
cheat?
person is not primarily, first and foremost, someone who does religious stuff. Doesn't mean that they can't have comments or beliefs about religious stuff, but this will become evident as we watched at least the first few minutes to me, as someone who is not Mormon, does not hate Mormon people, members of the church, but I have no soft spot in my heart for the religion. I think that I condemn it pretty strongly, not as like some negative social force, but rather as something being untrue and something that has led people's souls astray, right? I do think that Mormonism was started by a con man. So I'm not here to defend Mormonism, but rather I remember watching the beginning of this video and seeing a few things and pointing out good apologetics, right? Like good ways of doing this versus bad ways. And that really comes down to understanding the thing that you are critiquing. Because if you don't understand it, then your critique will just completely go over Mormons' heads. And I'm sure people in the comments will, if there are any, there are, right? All about how, wrong Mormonism is. But I do think that it is wrong. But if you have to critique it, you should do it well. Maybe this gets better. Again, I watched 5 minutes because I went, oh, you know what? Let me just do a reaction video to it. So maybe it gets better after the 5-minute mark. We're going to see. I'm going to pop my headphones in here. And we're going to get started. I brought my materials. So I brought my Book of Mormon. And I also brought this thing I got recently, which is the tripart thing, which is kind of their big 3 documents, which is the Book of Mormon, the Doctrines and Covenants, and the Pearl of Great Price, which are all kind of important documents to them. Scripture. So we are going to be referencing those, if I can think of anything off the top of my head. If not, we're going to be doing lots of live Googling. So let's get started. Take it away.
Under his pants, he is wearing magic underwear. And he believes that a convicted con man got golden tablets that no one else could see and sat with an angel to find out that the original Jews of the Bible were living in North America.
So this is Ken Gillette. Ken Gillette is a magician. Or Penn Gillette, not Ken Gillette. Penn Gillette, trash man. Penn and Teller, maybe you've heard of them. They do magic in Vegas. And good magician. I actually think he's from Jersey originally. I don't you can fact check me on that. I don't remember. But I feel like I watched an interview with him where he talked about kind of his magical journey beginnings as he did basically tricks on the boardwalk. That's kind of where he started, I think. In any case, so this is, but Penn Gillette also is a pretty outspoken atheist and a critiquer of religion. Like, he doesn't do this as much today because again, that kind of whole movement is done with. Not done with, like, not that like atheism's dead or whatever, but like that really in your face new atheism is kind of done and over with. Most of the people have kind of moved on, gone back to other things. But like here, right, he presents, and the things he says, I actually agree with these things. Of course, he says them in a disparaging way, at least with the magic underwear. Magic underwear refers to temple garments. Temple garments are these things that Mormons who are sealed in the temple are supposed to wear under their clothes all the time. They kind of look like long johns. Not quite, but like loose-fitting long johns is, I think, maybe the easiest way to describe them. and they Mormon men and women wear them, and they are in the temples, and they're supposed to wear them when they're adults all the time. I think I talked about this show. If I didn't, Banner Under Heaven, which is on Hulu, is all about this type of stuff. I think does a pretty good job, and it is, and you see that like Andrew Garfield's character is a Mormon detective, and you see him kind of take off his clothes, and you see the temple garments underneath. So the way that people will critique it and make fun of Mormons is by calling them magic underwear, because there's all sorts of beliefs about how they protect your body from all sorts of harm. So again, not like Penn Jillette is a anti-religion guy, and so he likes to take these things and describe them in terms that make anything sound stupid. Something important to know for Christians, right, is even if it does sound stupid to us, we can't just ignore supernatural claims, because we obviously also have a supernatural worldview, and just because something is supernatural doesn't mean it's wrong, right? But you have to have some form of evidence or truth that backs it up.
She's got to stay focused and tight on these curves.
Welcome to Utah!
Huh?
Have you been to Salt Lake City before?
No, but I can't talk now.
So I'm guessing this is from SNL around the, I think it was 2004 Salt Lake Olympics, right? And if you can't tell already, this is what Mormon missionaries used to wear. They still do wear this a lot of the time. I don't know if they still wear the suit top, the jackets, but they definitely wear the white shirts with the black ties. And on their Will Ferrell and Dan Aykroyd's suits, you see the little name tag thing, and that'll say like elder last name, and the other one would be like elder last name. So
do you know about the Church of Latter-day Saints?
Mormonism, I'm depressed by how successful it is.
By giving this talk, I don't mean...
So that was Richard Dawkins. I've talked a lot about Richard Dawkins before. Big atheist guy. He's the one who actually still keeps it up. Most of the others have kind of gone back to do other things. So that's him. Maybe he'll come back up again, but you'll see, that's who I reference when I talk about Richard Dawkins. I don't know who this girl is.
To devalue the religious lifestyle or those who choose to live it, but instead I aim to show the importance of allowing each individual to follow the path that makes the most sense to them.
I agree that the biblical stories are equally ridiculous, but the difference is we don't know they were written by known con men, but in fact he was a known felon.
Yeah.
So I don't know who that other guy is, but you could see, right, like from an atheist perspective, right, he says, all the stories in the Bible are equally ridiculous, which I don't think is true. I don't. I think that is usually a refrain that a lot of people use when they talk about this stuff. But I think if you were just to look at this historically, right, like if you're talking about, the resurrection of Jesus, you have to have ways to explain that rather than saying it's ridiculous. Whereas like something like the Jews built boats and came to the United States, and Native Americans are descendants of ancient Israelites, that is believe it or not, like that is a bigger, it sounds like it's grounded in reality, but a much bigger truth claim from my perspective, because there's at least evidence that shows people reacting to the death of Jesus in ways that you would not see typical, like claiming that he's been seen alive. So, that's a little bit of new atheist blustering there, but I'll let it slide.
Exactly did a bored 14-year-old in the 1800s go on to deceive 16 million people worldwide? American prophet Joseph Smith claimed to have found golden plates buried within a hill in upstate New York. These relics would be the foundation.
So I guess this is him who's talking now.
Of Mormonism, or the Church of Latter-day Saints, one of the fastest growing religions that was founded upon a teenager's fantasy. Joseph Smith grew up in western New York during the early 19th century. His family was deeply pious and engrossed with the Second Great Awakening, a Protestant religious reemergence in the United States from 1790 to 1840. The Second Great Awakening took place in the Bern District. Several counties of New York State which experienced great religious experimentation. The burn district got its name because everyone who lived there seemed to burn with religious zeal.
So this is, there's a lot of different reasons that people give why it was called the burned over district. The Second Great Awakening, right? So Great Awakenings, for those of you who don't know, in American history are times where religious revival happens, kind of nationwide. And there's debate about there being a third and maybe a fourth one. I would argue that there is a third one. And people give different names to them and all sorts of things. But the first two are generally accepted as being, what people understand when they say the first and second. So the first one is the early kind of 1700s. That's Jonathan Edwards up in Puritan guy, Congregationalist guy up in New England, which then spreads kind of throughout the Northeast. He was the president of Princeton Seminary and University, and so he starts the first one. The second one starts in the later 1700s into the 1800s. So I see it more as like an early 1800s phenomenon. And it really takes off in New York State. And so you have a lot of groups begin to come out of that. And maybe he'll talk about them, but you would recognize a lot of their names. Mormons are one of the groups that come out of that. And there is this religious revival that takes place in upstate New York. And it's called the Burned Over District because maybe people were burning with the spirit. It's also because, they talked about it being, kind of like a hellfire and brimstone type of thing, or just that religious fire has swept it so many times, right, that it's burned over. Different explanations, but he's not wrong in that.
Some religions to come out of the Second Great Awakening were the Shakers, also known as the Quakers.
So that's wrong. The Quakers greatly precede the Second Great Awakening. And I'm not even sure if the Shakers come from it. I'm fine to, but this is why we can live Google, right? So, the Shakers were a religious group in New England, mainly women. Yes, he founded 1747 in England and then organized in the United States. So I don't know where he's getting his information from on that. Quakers are from the 1600s, part of a kind of a post-English Civil War, during the English Civil War type of religious group that pops up. Obviously Penn from Pennsylvania, William Penn, he was a Quaker, right, most famously, which is why Pennsylvania is one of the places that enshrines in the pre-United States, one of the colonies that enshrines religious freedom, which was not the case in some of the other places, right? All the other colonies had state churches and things like that. So, again, does this mean that everything in this video is wrong? But no, right? But we want to make sure we get our information correct, especially if you're going to be arguing against something.
Fox Sisters of Hydesville and the Oneida Society. These rather modern faiths had some strange practices. The Fox Sisters would commune with the dead through something known as table rapping. The Oneida Society,
which was incredibly popular in the 1800s, like all that, like not Ouija board, that kind of comes later, but that type of stuff, right? Seances, they called it spiritism. That was incredibly popular. Abraham Lincoln's wife was super into it. That was big. So taking things from the outside, the culture that's around them, right? That's what they're doing. And they're mixing it with Christianity.
Practiced group marriage, possibly even inspiring Mormon polygamy, though some new religions would fail to produce a large following.
The Adventists became pretty big. So the Seventh-day Adventists come out of this, as do the Jehovah's Witnesses. They come out of this as well. Social gospel is still around. It's not so much church, more of like a theological mindset, but
others would flourish and evolve into modern denominations. After all, this was an insane time of religious exploration. With a little bit of creativity and dedication, one boy could fool the masses. As a teenager, Joseph attended one or more of these gatherings, but was conflicted and confused. He did not know which faith was the correct one. While praying in the woods
So this is one of the stories. So there's several different stories that Joseph gives over his life about this event that we're about to see. Several different versions of it, I should say. And this is the one that the Mormons will typically tell you, which is that he went into the woods as a boy to pray to find out which denomination was the right one.
At the age of 14, Joseph was supposedly visited by two personages, described as God the Father and Jesus Christ. God and Jesus told Joseph not to choose any of the proposed religions, and that contemporary faiths had turned aside from the gospel. Even after speaking with literally God himself, it took another 3 years for Joseph to find his preferred faith. One night in 1823, during his probably 46th prayer of the day, the angel known as Moroni visited Joseph.
So again, right, so this is the South Park episode, which is really funny, and I actually think it strikes a really good tone with critique, because the whole time, they call Mormonism dumb. Literally, they call it dumb. But they present it in such a way where it shows that they have no ill will towards anyone, which is, usually you don't really see that with South Park. Unlike this, right, where it's personally insulting kind of Joseph. And again, I have no, the 46th prayer of the day or whatever. I actually don't think Joseph Smith was that religious. I don't actually see that so much in his biography. I not that he wasn't, but I don't think that he was this really pious type of guy. It just hasn't been my reading of the historical sources. He does point out that he's 14 and it takes 3 years for him to find the golden plates. I actually think the dating on that is following the Mormon dating. I think if you look at the actual historical record, it actually happens much later when Joseph's older, right? He kind of retro looks back and says, actually, this happened when I was younger, but I wasn't able to translate them, so I come back later to translate them, yada, yada.
Instructing him to find a divine book consisting of golden plates, the one and only Book of Mormon. However,
so they believe that the angel Moroni, not Moroni, showed up and told Joseph to find the golden plates, and they're buried on a hill called Mount Moriah, something like that. It's someplace in upstate New York. And so he goes and he digs them up and finds them, and they're it's like that plot of land I think is owned by the Mormons today.
4 years, Joseph was not allowed to take the plates from their resting spot on Mount
Cumorah. Yeah, so again, right, there you see there's that time gap that I was talking about, right? So I believe what really happened is Joseph Smith, when he was, in his 20s, went back and said, when I was 14, I had this vision, and when I was 17, I was told to dig up these plates, but I haven't been able to translate them until now, type of thing, right?
Currently, there are 3 exclusive witnesses who saw the angel Moroni, the Book of Mormon, and other holy artifacts: Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer. It's pretty funny because these 3 men circle-jerked Joseph Smith's story, stating that they too had the same vision of golden plates before even meeting each other, but all 3 witnesses would eventually split from Joseph's theology.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. So you'll see, in the beginning of the Book of Mormon, you'll see, I guess he said, circle jerk, so I can't make this kid appropriate. In the beginning of the Book of Mormon, you always have what's called the attestation, which is basically to this day, right? Because this is their whole thing, is that they have, where is it? Usually it's in here. Here it is, yeah. So you have the testimony of the 3 witnesses, and the testimony of the 8 witnesses, and there's men who have signed their names to saying that they've seen these things and stuff like that. And so something to note is that these witnesses who claim that they have, a lot of them left the church because they had disputes with Joseph Smith. And some of them recanted, some of them went kind of found their own little cult things, so kind of interesting.
In fact, Whitmer would go on to start his own denomination. Another 8 witnesses apparently saw and handled these golden plates. I guess Moroni wasn't around that weekend. But again, how are we supposed to believe this when all 8 of the witnesses are members of Smith and Whitmer's families? Early critics of Joseph Smith believed him to be a conman and treasure hunter who traveled to ancient Native American burial grounds in hopes of digging up any sort of valuable items. There was not that much to do in the 1800s. This was a common practice among youths to pass time. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They really saw the golden plates and the angel Moroni. There were other relics supposedly found with the golden plates, such as the Urim and Thummim, ancient seer stones that Joseph would use to translate the golden plates, and of course the sword of Laban, passed down for generations, which, again, no one besides a select few can corroborate.
No living being should ever eat processed food for every single meal of their life.
Yeah, all right, okay, whatever. All right, dogs. Does you? No, it's not. All right.
Are you smelling it yet? Well, if not, then this is where it gets weird, if it wasn't weird already.
So some of the things he points out here, we have a lot to get through, so I don't want to nitpick everything, and I don't want to make this a two-parter. But like he points out that a lot of what Joseph Smith did here was kind of like occultic practices type things, which is true. And we also, like, you know, we have record of him doing something called dowsing. Dowsing rods are these things that they used to do to find water, right? To kind of find land that was suitable for agriculture and things like that. And so he would do that. He did all sorts of like these treasure hunter occultic things to kind of make money back then.
Because the golden plates found by Smith were written in Reformed Egyptian.
Yes. So this is something that he claims because, you know, no one could read. Outside of these few people who have claimed to see the golden plates, which again may or may not be true, which I don't personally believe. But the plates themselves were written in something called Reformed Egyptian, which is no language that exists. And I think if you look at this at the time period, you know, unlike the Bible, again, I think this is really important, or the Quran even, or like all these other things, is those are all based in actual human languages, which we can reference and transfer and translate and understand, right? Like, whatever the core text, now I believe it was written in English by Joseph Smith, copied from the King James Bible pretty heavily. But like, if you're going to be claiming these things about languages, right, this is something that must have been spoken and understood by people. I mean, we're able to understand languages that no one speaks anymore, you know, just by our use of archaeology and things like that. But here we have no evidence that this thing ever existed. The only reference to it is in the Book of Mormon. And so, not really a compelling case. And the one reason I would say that someone would do this, right, is because they want to hide this from people. They want to make them believe that they have the ability to magically translate these things, and that, you know, they don't have any sort of way to check them, right? Because this language doesn't exist, so you can make up whatever you want.
Reformed Egyptian came from the supposed Nephites and Lamanites, two civilizations that came from Jerusalem to the Americas before Christ's birth. The Book of Mormon also states another civilization named the Jaredites came to America even earlier, around the time God separated humanity for building the Tower of Babel. Remember, we're just talking about religious scripture here. In keeping with the Mormon tradition that America is a promised land, another belief is that after Jesus' resurrection, he visited North America during an age of war and darkness for the tribes. Due to these conflicts, the Nephites and Jaredites would all die out, leaving only the Lamanites to survive, becoming the ancestors of Native Americans. So the Mormons retconned Native American history. Right. This information is important because Joseph Smith would go on to find the plates written by a man named Moroni. Moroni pledged to...
So, all that's basically kind of the historical part of the Book of Mormon in a nutshell, right? That's like what it teaches, is that there were Jews that left from ancient Israel to go to sail across the Atlantic and land in America, and that their descendants would be the Native Americans. They would fight each other, and the Lamanites would win. The Lamanites are descendants of, or the ancestors of modern day Americans. They'd also be cursed to have red skin, which is why Native Americans look the way they do, because they kill off the Nephites, who are the good guys, basically. And they're the ones who they're the ones who stay faithful to the Lord. The Lamanites don't, and so the Lamanites are cursed, and that's why Native Americans don't look like this. Race plays a pretty big role in Mormonism. And I think this is important to point out, is that all of this is 1800 already in the water. So this isn't actually original to Mormon thought. Like, everyone associates this with Mormons because they're the ones who kept it, but there were actually scholars who were arguing for this in like the 1700s. Not like the curse to have red skin or whatever, but there were people, not at all accepted in the mainstream, I should say, but there were people already arguing in the 1700s that Native Americans could be the lost tribes of Israel. So Joseph Smith is hearing all of these things, and I think he hears what he likes and he applies it. And race plays a pretty big role in that, because racial thinking is coming out in the 1700s and becomes a big deal in the 1800s, right? Like, during this time, slavery is still practiced in the southern United States. So there still is that becomes a pretty big deal as well in Mormon thought. So I'm sure he'll talk about that.
Both believers and non-believers, that if they repent, follow Jesus, and love the Heavenly Father, they can become perfect. This is known as Moroni's promise, which would become one of the pillars of Mormonism, and Moroni was the son of Mormon, for whom the Book of Mormon is named after. He was also the last survivor of the Nephite civilization, and was instrumental in passing down the true gospel to the world. Thus, he became an angel, guiding Joseph Smith to his writings of God's true message centuries later. The message manifested itself into Joseph's new religion, the Church of Christ, founded in 1830. After 4 years, the religion would grow and change its name to the Church of Latter-day Saints. Latter-day Saints, meaning members are living in the days just before the second coming of Christ. Speaking of Christ, most contemporary renditions of Joseph Smith portray him with near-perfect features, reminiscent of the romanticization of Christ in modern art, or to be honest, a certain perceived master race. There are tall tales of Joseph Smith that make him appear holier than thou, including the time he refused alcohol to numb the pain of his leg surgery, or the time he calmed a storm for people who had faith in him. Mormons like to use these instances of miracle work in order to draw parallels with Jesus.
Which I just want to say, something to note, that from a religious perspective, is just because someone does miracles doesn't mean that they're right, you know? I think oftentimes miracles is only associated with God, but actually, if you look in Scripture, right, miracles are used to point to the persons doing them, right, and what they believe. They're signs, right? And there are people in the Bible, like Pharaoh's magicians, for example, who are actually able to do miracles, but like, they're not good guys. And so I think, like, one of the things we need to understand is that supernaturally, I could believe, for instance, that Joseph Smith did these things, just that he was doing it in the name of a power that isn't God, right? Supernaturally, and biblically, that makes sense, because that happens. So, you know, that's why people accuse Jesus of doing things in the name of Beelzebub, right? They say, oh, you're doing this in the name of Satan, something I would say about, like, you know, Mormonism, right? But, like, here, so all that's just to show is that people, you know, we also only associate miracles with, like, God and, like, good or whatever, but they can easily be used by evil things or evil people to mislead, right? So this is kind of spiritual warfare type stuff. But I would have no problem, if there was evidence to show, right, and that these aren't just stories made up a long time later, that this happened. I'd be like, all right, like I could believe that, but it doesn't mean that Joseph Smith's right, because everything he taught was bonkers.
There actually aren't any fully authenticated photos of Smith online. The best image of his likeness that exists is an oil portrait of Joseph Smith, created around 1842. However, his oil portrait looks noticeably different from images displayed by the LDS Church. Before we talk about the Book of Mormon, it's better to clarify that Mormons hold other texts sacred. They follow the Old and New Testaments of the Bible. The Articles of Faith, a declaration of religious opinions written by Joseph Smith. The Book of Abraham, which consists of Egyptian scrolls discovered by adventurer Antonio Lobolo and translated by Joseph Smith.
Yeah,
the
that's
Book
pretty
of Abraham
embarrassing.
is particularly interesting because it talks about the curse of Ham. The curse of Ham occurred in Genesis when Ham, the son of Noah, discovered his father naked in a tent and either had sexual relations with him, didn't cover him, or mocked him, depending on your source. Ham's son Canaan was cursed with a dark complexion, referred to as the curse of Cain, and the title servant of servants referred to as the curse of Ham, all because Noah was pissed off. These verses of the Bible, incorporated into Mormon doctrine.
Yeah, so one of the things that becomes a big deal in this time of racialist thinking is associating the curse of Ham with Ham's descendants, who are said to be Africans. And so they're cursed to have black skin, right? And you can see that in this time, this was used as a religious way of justifying kind of the racialist thinking that was going on. And Mormonism very much picks up on that in their scriptures with the Book of Abraham, which maybe he'll talk more about later.
Used by Joseph Smith and like-minded individuals to justify slavery in the pre-Civil War era. Smith would also use this passage as a means to bar black men from joining the Mormon priesthood. Other texts that Mormon...
A thing that stayed in place until the maybe 1980s? Let's see. 1978 is when they allowed black men to become priests in Mormonism. Because priests, by the way, there aren't formal pastors or religious leaders in Mormonism. Priest is basically every Mormon male is a priest and takes priesthood vows. And so black men were finally able to do that, which is basically just a normal thing in 1978. So, yeah. A long time.
Adhere to are the Doctrine and Covenants, a collection of revelations from the prophet Joseph Smith and lesser-known Latter-day Prophets, and the Pearl of Great Price, more ancient Egyptian texts translated by Joseph Smith and accepted by his church. However, without a doubt, the most important is the Book of Mormon, which is made up of 5 sections: the small plates of Nephi, the large plates of Nephi, the plates of Mormon, the words of Mormon, and the plates of Ether. Besides describing the history of the Nephites, Lamanites, and Jaredites in America, these plates act as scripture for the Mormon religion. The Book of Mormon is comparable to the Bible in the fact that it shares similar doctrine and is divided into smaller books or chapters titled after the primary author. An easy example is the 4 main Gospels in the Bible are named after the 4 evangelists: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Conversely, in the Book of Mormon, examples include the Book of Jacob, the Book of Omni, and the Book of Alma, all named after Israelites who came to America around 1000 BC. Now, are we even certain these people existed? No, because archaeologists have found no evidence of these civilizations in America.
There is
Once
no evidence.
Again, let's give them the generous benefit of the doubt and say these civilizations existed, and that the golden plates hold text of forgotten wisdom. Let's look at some of the Mormon concepts. First off, Mormons hate water. They believe God rebuked all water, and that Satan has total control over rivers, oceans, and lakes. For all we know, this is why Mormons live in Utah, a landlocked...
So something interesting, just that I've never actually heard that, so I'm interested to see where his source on that is. But that's actually pretty common belief among a lot of peoples around the world, is that like rivers and oceans are evil because they're unpredictable, right? In fact, a lot of ancient Christian baptism formulas include like baptism, like blessing over the water, in order to get rid of any evil spirits that are in it. You see this in the Hebrew Bible and in the Old Testament and in the New Testament with God commands over the seas, because there's this belief that the seas are inherently this evil place because they're uncontrollable, right, and unknowable and scary because of those reasons, right? But God has power over them. You see this with Jesus calming the storm, for example. So not exclusive to Mormonism, if true. I mean, this is in a bunch of religions. Like Babylonian religion also has this.
Arid state, besides their lakes, of course, which are apparently evil. One excerpt from the Book of Mormon says, "Behold, I, the Lord, in the beginning blessed the waters, but in the last days, by the mouth of my servant John."
So this isn't from the Book of Mormon. This is from Doctrines and Covenants, which actually I'm surprised he made this mistake, because it says it up there. The next morning after prayer, I received D&C. D&C is Doctrines and Covenants 61. So, like, you could, if you had it, right, you would open it up and you would go to Doctrines and Covenants, and they have a bunch of different sections, and you would just go to Doctrines and Covenants 61. Let me see if this is what it says. Just to do some live searching here. And I have not read all of the Doctrines and Covenants, I will say. So, yeah. This is it tells you first, one of the things I do like about the Mormons is they at least tell you what the whole section is about. This is about revelation Joseph received on the banks of the Missouri River on August 12th, 1831. They traveled by canoe. Many dangers were experienced. And so basically, I guess this is a vision that Joseph Smith gets that talks about how, you know, he is going to, the Lord will protect them on the water and stuff like that. This is all like taken from different spaces, but I see this here. It is in here.
I curse the waters. Another peculiar belief is that Mormons believe.
Again, point here is that, you know, yeah, I'm not here to nitpick, but these minor problems begin to stack up, and a Mormon apologist could make very easy work of this, right? They would have tough time with the archaeology and stuff like that, no doubt, because how do you make that work? But, like, if you just make simple mistakes like this, it ends up kind of ruining your overall argument. Like, you really want to know the stuff that you're talking about.
In the star or planet of Kolob, described in the Book of Abraham
Kolob
as being a celestial body closest to heaven. It is said that one day on Kolob is 1,000 years on Earth. Yeah, there's no evidence that this planet exists. Although some major lore is taken from Abrahamic religions, one difference in Mormonism is that Jesus is Lucifer's brother, and that Jesus was made savior of humanity.
Yeah, so firstly, planet Kolob is where God lives, and God, by our understanding, is not what Mormons believe, right? He's not this spirit, omnipotent, omniscient power from the beginning of creation. He himself is a created being, and he rules the planet on the planet of Kolob, and his planet to look over is our planet, basically. And we're all his children. But Jesus and Lucifer are some of his first children, and they're brothers. Yeah, I know.
He wanted to give us all free will. On the other hand, Lucifer rebelled against God and wanted to rule over Earth without morality, forcing humans to just become gods. To be honest, Lucifer's option doesn't sound too bad. Another fascinating Mormon concept is that there are three heavens. The telestial.
What did he say?
To just God and wanted to rule over Earth without morality, forcing humans to just become gods. To be honest, Lucifer's option doesn't.
Yeah, you know, if you're ever siding with the evil part of an argument, don't do that. But I guess it does get to this, you know, inherent. It gets to the idea of, like, the Mormon view is that, yeah, God could make us all gods, but he wants us to earn it ourselves, right? And Lucifer is basically, nah, we'll just force them, no free will, that sort of thing. People say this all the time. They're like, oh, the devil is the hero. You know, he wants us to have freedom from morality. It's like, no, that's not what being, that's not good. All right, freedom from morality means massive mistreatment of people, which even in the Mormon vision, you know, I agree with them, is wrong. So, you know, this is kind of, I don't know this guy's personal religious beliefs, but he seems kind of a typical anti-religion guy. So, you know.
Doesn't sound too bad. Another fascinating Mormon concept is that there are 3 heavens.
Yep.
The telestial, terrestrial, and celestial kingdoms.
Yep.
Similar to the rings of hell in Dante's Inferno, just a lot lamer. The telestial is the lowest of the 3
better,
kingdoms,
I would say, right?
reserved for people who only follow civil laws. The terrestrial kingdom comes second, occupied by people who only followed the law of Moses. At the top is the celestial kingdom, where God, Jesus, and those that follow his law reside. They go as far as to believe once you arrive at the celestial kingdom, you become a god. So You're telling me Lucifer was cool with just making us gods from the start. Also at the highest level, male Mormon followers partake in endless celestial sex. In order to reach this level of endless sex, Mormons must adhere to strict social...
So, I mean, that like, he gets that from that one documentary, which does have, is the cartoon he's been showing is from this one evangelical Christian documentary about Mormonism, which is not very accurate in some of the things it teaches. It is accurate in the sense, like, the way it's presenting it is presenting it in the way that's, like, obviously the most emphatic, right? That those words themselves are stolen from the documentary. They say endless celestial sex. Because basically what you get is you and your family you and your wife then get to have a planet which you rule over. And of course, in the original version, this was polygamy, right? So you have lots of wives, and you and your wives have sex, and you have spirit children, and then just like we're all spirit children of God, you get to have spirit children all over your own planet. And Mormon missionaries will be honest about this, and they'll be like, isn't that great? Right? They'll like be excited about, like, you get to have a family and rule over your planet forever and ever, right? That sort of thing, and yeah, stuff like that. So just that's how it works in the in it. And and so again, he's using kind of hyperbolic terms though.
Tenets. For example, they cannot consume alcohol, tobacco, coffee, or even tea. They are also discouraged from marrying outside their religion, and it's considered a serious sin to have sex before marriage.
Again, very normal in religion. Sorry, like not typical for Mormons, right? Like Jews, Christians, Muslims. I would just say in general, you probably shouldn't marry with people who have very different beliefs than you, which it might work for a short amount of time, but as soon as kids are in the picture, you see where the problems begin, because you start to have to decide. So not a bad thing. You can present that with ominous music and tone, but it's actually a normal thing that lots of people do. And of course, like, again, premarital sex, again, not looked kindly upon by other Abrahamic and other religions, not just Abrahamic religions, right?
Some Mormons have creatively devised ways to skirt this specific theological restriction, such as soaking and ATMing. Soaking, defined by the Urban
Dictionary.
We
definitely know that this is for kids. This isn't for
stick your
kids,
penis
right?
inside of the vagina, but you don't move it, you don't thrust or anything, and it kind of like, it's not really a sin. It's not.
Yeah.
While ATMing, on the other hand, can best be explained by popular streamer Cutie Cinderella.
ATMing is when, doesn't count as sex, you, as a woman, your pants are down, and the guy takes his dick and he slides it up and down your butt crack until he comes.
Like a credit card? ATM.
And we call it ATMing.
Joseph Smith knew.
Yeah, I mean,
the best way
so
to
this is
preserve-
true. So this like happens on Brigham Young's campus and stuff like that. And this has been around as long as we've had these arguments about premarital sex, right? Like, people, I mean, at this point, as a religious leader, right, here's what I say to stuff like that, is like, just do it. You know, like, you're not pulling the wool over God's eyes. That's kind of the funny thing about all these things, right? Like, people try to get around it. They'll say, oh, this is fine, but this is too much, this isn't enough, whatever, right? Like, it's you're not going to fool God. So, like, you know, I don't think, right now he's using this to disparage Mormonism. This is just human behavior, right? Like, people of other religions do stuff like this too, right? Like, the Flight of the Conchords have, like, whole songs about Catholic girls and how they'll try and, like, do these exact same things, right? So, like, let's not pretend as though this is unique. And also, like, that if anyone does do that, you know, just admit that what you're doing is sex. You know, if you're doing these types of things, it's sex. Don't get too cute. Just you know, just admit to yourself that what you're doing is wrong.
Mormonism was to create a cultural fish tank, an echo chamber that had existential consequences if you were to deviate from his cult. I mean truth. The early Mormon church was rife with division. Leaders left on their own accord or were excommunicated, one of which was Oliver Cowdery, one of the 3 witnesses who found himself on the other end of Joseph Smith's lifelong...
So lots of religious communities can be insular, right? But one of the important things to note is in Mormonism, there's a heavy emphasis on, like, in Christianity, you can leave, right? If you be a believer or not a believer, you can leave, and you aren't supposed to be ostracized or hated or anything like that. In Mormonism, if you leave, you are supposed to be dead to your family, right? Like, they expect you not to talk or communicate with anyone. So it's not a cult, right? Again, we throw this word cult around. Maybe it started that way, but these days it's become so ingrained in popular culture that you really, at least in Utah and other places where it's kind of become an acceptable faith, right? So it's not in the same classification as something like a small group of people. That might have been how it started, but these days, right, there's heavy emphasis on cultural belonging, and the only people who go to hell in Mormonism are people who leave, right? So even non-believers go to heaven. Even people who are like Buddhists, right, or Shinto or whatever, they all go to heaven. They just don't go to the one where you can become a god, right? The only people who get thrown into what the Mormons call outer darkness, which is hell, they are the ones who were Mormon and leave. And I think you see there something really important. In a religion that is dedicated to holding people down, right, like, or like making sure no one leaves and holding control over people, you would say that the only people who are going to hell are people who leave, right? That's the thing. If you know, people who do leave the church, like, who aren't Christian anymore, like, we believe in eternal judgment for everyone, right? Who isn't grafted onto Christ, but that's not specific to people who leave, right? That's literally everyone who isn't a Christian. So again, like, you see these tendencies of control. So I agree those are there, especially at this point. And Joseph Smith does use prophecy to get his way a lot of the time.
Ego trip. Nowadays, Mormonism is made up of 3 different sects. Just like Christianity has Protestants and Catholics, Mormonism has the LDS Church,
and a lot of others,
Mormon fundamentalism, and liberal reformist Mormonism. You probably know the LDS Church from their classic door-to-door missionaries, while Mormon fundamentalists... I
mean, the other 2 groups, the Mormon fundamentalists and the liberal reformist Mormons are... I mean, I would be surprised that even if, like, 1% of Mormon population was in the liberal branch. Their fundamentalists get lots of news coverage, but they aren't anywhere near the majority of what Mormons. And there's a bunch of other splinter groups as well. So, which kind of don't fall into any of these categories.
Are notorious for their polygamy, made popular by Joseph Smith himself. According to the church website, they have a pyramidal structure. The church is divided into 22 regions across the world. Those regions are further divided into stakes, each consisting of 5 to 12 wards, which is usually a single church or parish. All this to say that the Mormon church system is vast and confusing with varying levels of power. And if you're not trying to steal Russell M. Nelson's look, you're gonna want the help of today's video sponsor. Which is why today's video is sponsored by Keeps. Keeps is a subscription service that
I'm bald, it's not gonna work. I just know.
The main sex, it's well known that Mormonism...
You know what, actually, you know what, we're kind of running out of time, and this has been going on, so we're gonna do a two-parter. I didn't want to do that, but I think we're gonna have to do that. So one of the things that I want to take away from this, just we're gonna bring it back for a second to me here, because it's all about me, right? Before I send you guys, and we're gonna do part 2 next week, is notice here, right, that the tone that's taken, and whether or not this is effective. So who is this video effective for? Not Mormons, right? The average person who watches this who's a Mormon is going to be feeling as though, rightly, like they're being attacked, right? Because the way he speaks about them, the way he speaks about their faith and their community is not very generously, right? Not charitably. And again, right? Believe this is hogwash. Believe it's satanic even. You know, I'll say it's evil. But the important thing to note is that if you're critiquing belief, right, you have to do this in a way that is in love, right? Speaking the truth in love is really important here. And there are really good Christian apologetics people who do this. If you're going to just bash and attack, like whether or not what you're saying is true or not, ends up being cut away, right? It'll get you views. It'll get you lots of, to borrow his words, circle jerking from other atheists and people who are anti-Mormon, right? So Christians who could watch this video and do the same thing, right? But the point here is that and if you make mistakes, right, like it just becomes so easy for people to dismiss. Because all you have to be, like, imagine if, like, someone made a critique of the Bible that was, you know, good, maybe, but they ended up saying, like, instead, even though it says Genesis at the top, they say from this reading from Exodus or this reading from Matthew, right? Like, you would be like, well, this person just doesn't know what they're talking about, and probably has just cribbed this information from someone else, right? Like, that's kind of what I get here, is that he's probably just, again, because he's quoted some of these sources that I've seen, like that cartoon verbatim, that it probably reveals to me that he doesn't do original research, but rather a lot of what he's saying from his script has been kind of taken from other things. Yeah, I'm sure he's done some original writing. I don't want to completely bash the guy, but, like, you have to at least understand, you know, on a level that's there, like, to have a real understanding of what is talking about, right? And not judging people by the failures of their culture, you know, but rather on kind of what their statements and what their facts are. Because I know Mormon apologists could probably definitely, like, take people who would just show up to them with this video and probably dismantle it pretty easily without even having to face some of the facts, right? They could just kind of rely on the guy's tone and the mistakes he's made to show he doesn't really know anything about religion. So, yeah, that's why it's important, right? That's why that biblical argument of speaking the truth in love and having a handle on things so you're not blown around by doctrine. So if a Joseph Smith shows up, you're not just convinced in polygamy and all this stuff, which we really didn't even get to in this video, so I wonder if he's going to get to that next time. So, yeah, long video. Yeah, it's actually not long. It's only 30 minutes, but you know it's a good reaction from someone if it's at least doubling the length of the video. The bad reaction ones are where they just, like, watch it and, like, make sounds, right? So you can tell I at least care. All right, I'll see you guys Sunday for worship, next week for Bible study, and Thursday for the second part of this video. And thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.